Cindy, Linny, and I enrolled in summer school. We took art from Mrs. White and math from Mr. McElroy. None of us liked math, but we were told to brush up on our math skills because 8th grade math was way hard. All of us got massive crushes on the dark-haired, single Mr. McElroy. I think that was the only time I understood math. It took me until junior year in high school to figure out that the teacher had nothing to do with my learning the subject. It helped if I could understand their presentation, but it was my job to understand. Our group went to Torrance Beach as often as we could beg, barter, or cajole a ride from our family members. Kathy told us she just had to go to the beach as often as possible. I suspected it had something to do with her acne, which was massive, because she rarely went in to swim. I was in the water constantly, and I loved to body surf. It felt like I was flying. With every mother and older brother fed up with driving us to the beach, eventually we had to come up with an alternative. Palos Verdes had no buses, and none of us with our bicycles worked, so we were stumped. One day we made the decision to walk. It was a little over 2 miles to the Torrance Beach Cove from Kathy's house, and not everyone wanted to walk. At 10 a.m. that Wednesday, we were a small group. Kathy, Cindy, Linny, and I met, put on our tennis shoes, and headed north on Palos Verdes Drive. I should mention now athletically that the four of us were very different. In track and field, I was one of the fastest girls in cross country in the 800-meter run. Kathy pulled her weight in relay races and short sprints, and Cindy could jump any height with grace and style. Linny, politely saying, was not an athlete. Linny was cherubic, with blue eyes and blonde curls. Her compassion and kindness inspired the rest of us to behave better. And walking to the beach that day, we slowed our pace for her. I carried my aqua blue pocket transistor radio and sang to the animals, the House of the Rising Sun, as we set out. Palos Verdes Estates borders on the rocky edge of the Pacific Ocean. The main road winds along the shoreline buttressed by craggy hills. That winter, a scene from a movie was filmed in the main cove. Tony Curtis starred. Linny's mother got word of the filming, and we raced to the spot to see a real live movie star and film crew. Remembering that day, we giggled as we went over the details of how short Tony Curtis was and how big his head looked. We couldn't wait for the movie to open in theaters. By this time, we had walked about a quarter of a mile in our quest to the beach. Rounding the curve that brought the road up against the craggy hills to our right, we slowed. Perhaps because we were out of the direct sun and the cooler air gave us a moment of comfort. Along this stretch, the boulevard funneled into a one-lane roadway and hugged the contours of the hills for the next mile. There were 2 separate dirt areas large enough for cars to pull off to the side if needed to let faster cars pass or change the inevitable flat tire. The first outlet was the largest, a natural inlet surrounded by wild, prickly bushes that dominated the hill with room for 2 cars. The second was much smaller, easily ignored, and desolate. We passed the first area, and Kathy demanded we pick up our pace. The path along the road was single file at this point. There was no sidewalk on either side of the strip of Palos Verdes Drive, just a dirt trench. We rounded the curve, nestled in the small turnover. A white van was parked with its rear door wide open. It was a curious sight, and we slowed slightly. As we continued, our view shifted to gain a perspective inside the van. A man, perhaps 30, dark hair, sat naked, fully erect, and wickedly smiling at us. Kathy screamed, then shouted to us, "Run! Run!" We did. Kathy, with her talent at short distances, vanished around the corner in a cloud of dust. I, being the long distance runner, was just getting my legs going when from behind me I heard Cindy yell, "Wait! Wait!" I looked back. Linny was gasping, trying her best to move quickly to no avail, and Cindy was pulling her. I slowed and, placing Linny's arm around my shoulder, supported her around the curves towards Malaga Cove Shopping Center. Cindy and I spotted the man in his white van speed past us, and the hair on the back of my neck crackled. Linny began weeping. Cindy, her eyes on the van, reassured her. It's okay. He's gone. He's not stopping. We finally made it to where Kathy stopped, which was at the edge of the shopping area. Kathy, still shaking by the time we joined her, told us we needed to go to the police immediately. You don't understand. We have to report this, she spoke through gulps of air. Luckily, I knew the Welcome to Malaga Cove sign was ahead with directions to local businesses. A gold-painted arrow pointed to the right for the police station, and we walked into the small front office and spoke to the desk officer. Kathy was clearly upset, and a woman officer offered to speak with her in private. The older officer addressed Cindy and I. Linny was silent and held my hand in a gesture of thanks. Did he have facial hair, a mustache, or beard? No. How tall was he? Would you guess he was about my size? No, he was smaller. Was he muscular like me or thin? No, just normal. How old was he? Younger than me or older? Younger. And you saw him drive past you when you were coming here? Yes. Did he look at you when he drove past? Yes. The older officer calmly listened, and a young officer was dispatched to cruise around the area to see if he could spot anything. By how quickly they responded and how carefully they dealt with us, something told me they knew this man. They'd dealt with him before. That man's face is buried in my memory. He wouldn't be the only strange man inappropriately exposing himself to me, but he was the first. And I can give you a detailed description now that I couldn't as a tongue-tied, shocked 11-year-old. He was a white male, about 5'9", 5'10", in his late 20s or early 30s, with hairy legs, arms, and chest. He looked like he hadn't shaved that morning, with close-cropped dark hair, a wide, toothy mouth, and fierce eyes that could have been blue, but assuredly not brown. His hands had thick fingers and wide palms when he waved to us, and his head was round, not long or angular. The only thing he wore were tan, slip-on boat shoes. I said none of that at the police station. The police gave us cups of water, took down our names, addresses, and phone numbers, asked if we could identify the man if we saw him again. I could, and Cindy could. Kathy said not really, and Linny gave a flat no. They asked who we could call to come pick us up. Linny's mother didn't have a car today because her father was on a job at the San Pedro Harbor. Cindy's mother and father worked downtown LA, and my mother was at USC. I had no idea how to reach her. Kathy called her mom at the real estate office. When she showed up, she held Kathy tightly and rocked her gently, saying, "My baby, my girl." They both cried. It took Kathy a year to tell us about her first incident with a peeping Tom and how it escalated. We loaded into their Buick station wagon and went home. That night, the police called each of our families as a checkup. A woman officer spoke with my mother, and I hadn't told anyone what happened, simply because no one was home to tell. My sister came home in a fit at 4 o'clock and stormed around the house. My older brother was out with friends and probably wouldn't be home until after curfew. And my younger brother, who returned from Cub Scouts at 3 o'clock, was 7. What would I say to him? By 7 o'clock, my mother and her friends arrived, all excited to grill burgers, talk about poetry, and drink wine. What was I supposed to say? Hey, guess what? Some guy was naked in a van, and when we walked to the beach today, I saw his thing. It seemed inappropriate to bring up at their party. I got busted when the police called at 8 o'clock. After the call, I overheard one of my mother's friends whisper to her, "Don't make a big deal out of it. She wasn't hurt, so why go over it again?" No questions were asked, ever. It wasn't my first experience of careless indifference, and it wouldn't be my last. It was difficult, like that steel ball in Newton's cradle, not to make up that I wasn't worth the trouble. The end.